Welcome back to God Rock Radio. I'm Jack the Agnostic Garcia, and let's get right into it. Now, after World War I, which of course happened between 1914 and 1918, Germany was engulfed in massive war debt, and of course massive inflation. And the crippled nation turned to a demonic leader, Adolf Hitler, who prescribed a restructuring of German society along dictatorial and racial or racist lines. Hitler preached his unholy program of demographic revolution in writings and speeches, and rather than continue ruling themselves, many Germans preferred to surrender their will to his. And once lifted into power in 1933, Hitler proceeded to fulfill his, rather satanic campaign promises. Germany initiated a rearmament program anticipating a war of genocide and expansion. The country was just beginning to recover from the Great Depression, and the rearmament program drew on unutilized labor as well as capital resources, and initially it appeared to improve the German economy without causing massive inflation. Hitler's first military goals were to annex Austria and destroy Czechoslovakia. This was the first war in a four-war program. Planes and tanks built during the early 30s were slated for the Second War against England and France, which Hitler anticipated to be far more difficult. Stage 3 of Hitler's four-war plan was to be against the Soviet Union, which the Germans rather foolishly expected to be quick and easy. The hoped-for rapid conquest of the Soviet Union would provide vast lands for German settlers after the Russian inhabitants had been killed or expelled. Now, the Fourth War would have been against the United States, or it was against the United States. This was also thought to be simple once battle was engaged. The Americans were considered by the Nazi Schweinhunds to be as weak and inferior as the Soviets. This, of course, was another big mistake. But because they were far away and had a large navy, America had a pretty good navy, bomber planes, which could cross the Atlantic without refueling, and return without refueling, of course, along with super battleships, would be put into construction after the first three phases of the four-war plan. Now, the question is, why were these insane and demonic plans not nipped in the bud by the German people? Well, because inside the German nation itself, massive and increasing support for the Nazi regime among civilians and the military, combined with the controls of Hitler's dictatorship, a dictatorship which many Germans had actually wanted, muted any and all opposition. Now, with the German invasion of Poland in September 1939, World War II, Hitler's twisted and satanic iron dream and racist demographic revolution begins. Now, inside the German nation itself, the mass killing of the elderly, the sick, the handicapped, and the mentally ill went into full-tilt boogie. These were Germans who were thought to be inferior and unproductive. Now, while in Poland, the inferior race of Hitler's perverse ideology, the Jewish people, were placed into concentration camps, which of course were inhuman and hellish places of mass extermination. Sadly, this mass genocide would be basically repeated in every nation conquered by the Third Reich during the bloody years, 1939 to 1945, of this massive and unholy conflict. With the slaughtering of millions of gypsies, gays, Christians, atheists, and of course Jews who took the brunt of this mass slaughter, in my opinion, amounts to nothing less than the greatest tragedy ever to befall the human race. Now, in June 1979, Pope John Paul II came to Auschwitz, the grim extermination camp which lay within his former diocese when he was the Archbishop of Krakow in Poland. There, Pope John Paul II knelt in prayer on the, bare, cold concrete floor of the death cell of Raymond Maximillian Maria Colby. Colby's case for canonization and sainthood was, to say the least, rather difficult. It had caused much argument and debate within the Church of Rome and the Vatican itself. Colby was born on January 7th, 1894. At the age of 10, he receives a vision of the Blessed Virgin Mary. Mary is holding out two glistening crowns, one that is white and one that is red. This, of course, changes the young Colby's life forever. In 1917, while a member of the Franciscan order, he joins the Franciscans. Colby created the Militia of Mary Immaculate, a worldwide organization dedicated to the devotion to the Blessed Virgin. The movement slowly grew and grew. Colby carried his message as far away as Asia, into Japan, for example, and established a thriving friary in his own native Poland. He called it Nipuk ala Nau, or Mary's City. He is, of course, by this time ordained as a priest. Colby is in charge of the friary when the Nazi army invades and World War II breaks out. By early 1941, the Nazis were preparing to invade Russia, and all intellectuals and troublemakers, or anyone who opposed the Third Reich, were rounded up and thrown into prison. On May 28th, Father Raymond Maximilian Maria Colby was sent to the Auschwitz extermination camp. The Nazis' final solution was sadly in full swing, and countless numbers of Jews, gypsies, communists, gays, atheists, and even Christians were being ruthlessly put to death. The toll of this inhuman, satanic horror, this hell on earth, grew and grew. Now, at 6 p.m. On July 30th, 1941, the weary prisoners of Cell Block 14 were ordered before Commandant Fritz. As the commander of the extermination camp approached the starving prisoners, he shouted, "An inmate has escaped. Therefore, as punishment, 10 of you will now be chosen to die." The commandant then pointed with his riding crop towards the weary prisoners, counting off 1, 2, 3, 4, picking people at random, basically. On and on he goes. All the prisoners accepted their fate in silence. But when Commander Fritz got to the 10th man slated for execution, the 10th prisoner, upon hearing the news of his imminent death, thought out loud, saying, "My poor wife and children." And at that very moment, Father Raymond Maximilian Maria Colby stepped up from the line of weary and starving prisoners and said to the German commander, "I have no wife and children. Let me be chosen in his place." "Who the hell are you?" asked Commandant Fritz. "I am a Roman Catholic priest," answered Father Colby. "Very well," said the German officer. "One is just as good as another. Take them away." So the 10 men were then stripped naked and placed in a cold, dark cell, basically a bunker, a cell in which there was neither furniture or blankets. And so the 10 men were left to slowly starve to death. Father Colby did his best to comfort his fellow sufferers, leading them in prayers and hymns. And slowly, the 10 men, one by one, died. Towards the end of this, hellish ordeal, only 4 men were left alive. The commandant of Auschwitz then decided to visit the starving condemned men, for the officer was not too happy with the fact that it was taking these men far too long to die. As the officer entered the cold and dark concrete cell, he said, "You have delayed us long enough. We're tired of waiting for you to die." And so, on August 14th, 1941, Father Colby and the 3 remaining starving inmates inside the cold, dark cell died by lethal injection. Now, Father Colby's case for sainthood would years later provoke consternation within the Vatican itself. 2 miracles of healing had already been credited to him since his death, and under the rules of the Roman Catholic Church, this was enough to qualify Colby as a martyr for sainthood. But since Father Colby had technically not been killed for his faith in Christ, he dies in the place of another man. He could not be venerated as a martyr. Now, as a concession, Pope Paul VI declared Colby a martyr of charity, but this term had no official standing. So Father Colby could still not be venerated as a martyr and transformed into a saint. This did not exactly satisfy Father Colby's proponents, among them the Archbishop Karol Wojtyła, the future Pope John Paul II. In 1982, before a massive crowd, Pope John Paul II canonized Father Raymond Maximillian Maria Colby, thus changing the criteria for sainthood for the first time in centuries. Father Colby was destined to be the first in a new category of saint, martyr of charity. His feast day is August 14th. Like Father Raymond Maximilian Maria Colby, Saint Edith Stein, a highly intellectual Jewish woman who converted to Christianity and became a Carmelite nun, would also die in the Auschwitz extermination camp. We will tell her amazing and controversial story in our next talk segment. But first, some more music.